Howdy fellas, Patrick here with Utah Pressure Washing. So a few days ago I posted a video asking what kind of content you wanted to see, and I've had a few people reach out to me, and a few people have said they'd like to see a rundown of my rig. And gosh, it seems obvious now that they say it. I can't believe I've never done one before, but I guess I haven't. So I'm going to do a rundown of my rig. I'll just start with where the water sort of enters the ecosystem as it is, as if you will, to where it exits, just kind of from beginning to end, and I'll just kind of show you how it works. So yeah, without further ado, I'll flip the camera around and take you through it real quick. All right, so this is my pressure washing rig. This is the current iteration of it. This is always evolving. This is ever changing. I think if you're somebody that takes pride in what you do and constantly is striving to improve, like I think most of us do, something like this will kind of always be in a constant state of flux and evolution. You'll always be trying to improve things and make things run more efficiently and run better. And so this is just sort of the current iteration. It's gone through several, but this is what's working for me right now, and this may change, or things about this definitely will change in the future, but this is just sort of where I'm at right now. Just sort of a snapshot of where I am in the fall of 2023. A couple things I'll say is there's sort of two overarching themes that on this rig that I try to focus on and that are a priority for me. One is simplicity. I try to keep things as simple as I possibly can. I not only in this rig, but just in life in general, that's just sort of an overarching mantra of mine. The simpler things are, the less moving parts, the less parts in general that you have. There are fewer things to break down, fewer things to replace, and things just seem to run better the simpler they are. The more moving parts you have, the more complicated it is, the more opportunities there are for something along the line to break down. So I try to keep things simple. I do think you reach a point where when you try to make improvements in sort of complex systems like this, or in systems with a lot of moving parts, you get diminishing returns. I know personally I've spent, hundreds of dollars and hours of labor to try to improve things, only to find when everything was said and done that, I've made an improvement that maybe is going to save me 30 seconds per job, and it's just one more part that's going to break down and one more expense, and it was just all for naught. So I try to just keep things as simple as I possibly can, and that's kind of my overarching mantra here. The other one that I always try to keep in mind is hose management. Everybody's different, but for me, there's nothing I hate more than fighting hoses. I hate fighting hoses. I hate untangling hoses. I think it is one of the biggest time sucks that can possibly happen to you on a job. Not only is it aggravating, but it's just a royal waste of time and energy. And so I try to design this always keeping in mind hose management. What's going to be the most efficient way for me to manage my hoses. I don't want to drag any more hoses around that I have to. I really want to focus on very efficient, very simple hose management. And so with that being said, I will start over here at the intake. We're doing this inside my garage today because it's the middle of November and it's cold outside. And so this is where I keep it parked so it doesn't freeze. And I'm going to do it here so I don't freeze. Okay. So we'll start over here with just this simple garden hose. Okay, this is a Flexzilla hose. This is really the only kind of hose I run on this rig. This is good stuff. It's not the most expensive hose out there. It's a little pricey, but I think it's worth it. It's been a really good hose. And then it's just on this very inexpensive hose reel. I probably got this on Amazon for like 30 bucks. I mounted this specific hose reel on here at the beginning of the year, and it's still doing great. I personally can't justify spending $300 or something like that on a on a reel that's going to do nothing but hold garden hose, and it's going to be used once at the beginning of the job and once at the end of the job. But that just doesn't make sense to me. You know, I can't justify shelling out the dough for something like that, for something that's just going to hold garden hose. So I just use this very inexpensive hose reel. It works great. I just welded together these custom mounts to mount it right on the side of my trailer. And like all of my hoses, this is mounted so it will come off basically the passenger side. So if you imagine you're pulling up to a job and you pull off onto the side, your job is going to be right here. All of your hoses are going to come up this way. That way you're not pulling hoses across your rig, you know, and not only is that inefficient and it makes you prone to tangles, you know, there's a chance you're going to lay them across your muffler and burn them, which I have done before. And it's just again, a more efficient way to do it. And yes, my fingernails are painted. I have a 5-year-old daughter. When you have a 5-year-old little girl, you find yourself doing things you wouldn't normally do. So what will happen is the first thing at the job is I'll find my outdoor spigot, hook up this water hose. It's going to come through here. Okay, this is the water outlet. I have it hard plumbed with a piece of, I believe this is 1.25 inch hose. It's going to come directly into my buffer tank, okay, with these banjo fittings here. Okay, so water will feed into my buffer tank here. This is a 100-gallon buffer tank, but it only, because of the way I have it plumbed, I can only hold about 80 gallons in it, which for me is plenty. That's very rarely an issue. I very rarely run my buffer tank dry, even with an 8-gallon per minute machine. I'm gonna cut in here real quick because I realized I forgot something that's kind of important. So on my my little fitting that comes from the water source into the buffer tank, basically my buffer tank intake. If you look under here, and hopefully I'll be able to show it on camera. Maybe not. There. If you look in there, in my tank, directly underneath that valve, I've got what's called or under this banjo fitting, I've got what's called a Hudson valve. Okay, and that's basically just a float valve that once the water level rises to a certain level, like it is now, that it floats up and a valve closes and it shuts off the water. So what that allows me to do is, the very first thing I do when I get to a job is I hook up to my water source, I turn the water on, and I leave it on the entire time. I don't have to keep running back and forth and turning on and off the water. Once this reaches a certain level, it gets full enough, that valve closes, and it's just like pinching off a hose. It just stops the flow of water temporarily. It doesn't damage the customer's water spigot or anything like that. Again, just like pinching a hose, it just stops that automatically. And that saves me a ton of time in having to either run back and forth to turn the water on or off, or having this thing overflow and looking really unprofessional and wasting a bunch of water. And so I just wanted to include that because I think that's important. That's like a $30, $40 part that can make a world of difference in your efficiency. So water goes into the buffer tank, and then we'll come around here to this other side. I've got another banjo fitting down here. Let's see if I can get it to focus. And I got another banjo fitting down here that I've plumbed into there. An elbow coming off, a 90-degree elbow coming off with more of that 1.25 inch tubing to a banjo filter. So the water is going to run through this filter, come up more of this 1.25 inch tubing directly into my pump intake. So there's my pump intake, okay? The water's going to intake through here, get pressurized in this pump here. It's going to come out. Here's my unloader valve. Okay, and what I've done is I have hard plumbed my bypass valve. See, I've got I think this is 1-inch hose. I've just gone ahead and hard plumbed that to bypass right back into my buffer tank. Okay, so it's kind of, the water is kind of circling around and recycling through. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Instead of letting that water, when this unloader valve is closed, instead of letting that water continue to just cycle through, when I say, you know, you have your hand off the trigger, I let that water bypass right back into my buffer tank. So that way the water in my pump stays cool. I can let my hand off the trigger as long as I want, and I don't have to worry about burning out my pump, but I'm also not wasting any water. I'm not just, I know some guys that have like mobile rigs, they'll just have a hose come off and it'll just kind of go nowhere and the water will splash on the ground, which, you know, is no big deal. But this way I'm not wasting any of that water that's being bypassed. Okay, so if you go past the unloader valve here, we're gonna get to my chemical injector and the bypass. I actually have a video on how I made this bypass. I made this myself. I kind of stitched it together with parts that I had laying around and some parts that I ordered, but this is my chemical injector bypass. If you want to see a video on how I made this, go look at my channel. Maybe I'll link it up here and you can check it out. Okay, so the water will come through here and it's either gonna bypass this chemical injector, come straight out here. Here is just a water pressure gauge that I pretty much keep on there all the time, just in case I need to check the water pressure for whatever reason. And then it's gonna go into this little 6-foot jumper hose. Okay, now, even if it does go through my chemical injector, it's not going to change anything past this point. So it's either going to flow straight through here if this valve is open, or if this valve is closed, it's first going to go through my chemical injector. It's going to siphon chemical, come through this little jumper hose, back down here, and then come out this hose. I've got a whole video on chemical injectors and check valves if you want to check that out. I always use check valves. There's a reason for that. If you're interested to know why, go check out my video on check valves and chemical injectors. I give like a 30 or 40 minute rundown on how and why that works. Sorry about that. I got a phone call from my attorney while I was mid-sentence. So anyway, so here's the outtake of my pump. It's either going to go through this chemical injector or it's going to bypass this chemical injector. The water's going to flow through this little jumper hose here. I believe it's a 6-foot jumper hose. And then we'll come around here. Sorry, my garage is an absolute disaster. I'm in the middle of reconfiguring a bunch of stuff in my other business, and things are kind of in a state of disarray at the moment. So the jumper hose is going to come to the intake of this hose reel, which I've just hard plumbed it in there. I don't foresee ever having to remove that. So instead of a quick connect or anything, I've just hard plumbed that in there. The water will flow through there and then it will come out the end of my hose here. And so that's basically the journey from the house to my hose, okay? Pretty simple, pretty basic. Water comes in here, into the buffer tank, from the buffer tank, into the pump, from the pump, out to the hose, okay? A few little pit stops here and there, but the overall concept is very, very basic, about as simple as you're gonna get for a professional level rig. And so, as far as the ancillaries on this thing, I always keep a few different lengths of garden hose on here. They're not very organized at the moment, but this is probably about 100 feet worth of extra garden hose cut into different lengths. I keep about 100 feet on the reel. 90% of the time, that's enough to reach from wherever I'm parked to the outdoor spigot. Sometimes it's not, so I found it's useful to just have a few different lengths of garden hose laying here. So if I need an extra 10 feet, I'll grab a 10-foot length, or I think I have like a 10-foot, a couple 20-foot lengths, a couple 25-foot lengths, something like that. So that way, if I'm only 10 feet shy of being able to reach the outdoor spigot, I don't have to grab a whole other, 50-foot or 100-foot length of hose and fight that. Again, hose management. I want to have as little hose coming off my trailer as I possibly can, just because that makes it easier to manage. On the back here, I just have a little storage bin where I keep whatever extra chemicals I need. Bleach, LA's Totally Awesome. Again, things are in a state of disarray here, but I always keep LA's Totally Awesome on my rig because that's just a very good all-purpose cleaner. I will usually keep a bottle of some kind of hydrochloric acid because that's good for taking hard water stains off of windows. You know, the Dawn dish soap I use for window cleaning. I keep a few extra different little brush heads, and a little handheld brush. Just little things that I found really handy will go in here. As far as my main bleach solution, I will keep those in these little 5-gallon container here. These little water cube containers I found work great. I will just fill up as many of those as I think I'm gonna need for the day. And then, you know, one of these 5-gallon containers will end up going right here. And then I will just drop my dipstick from my chemical injector directly into there. And I'll also do that with degreaser or whatever else I'm gonna run through my chemical injector. We'll just go, I have several of these containers. Everything will just get mixed up in one of those, and that's what I'll run my chemicals through. Now, this 30-gallon tank with this 12-volt pump here, of everything on this rig, this is probably my biggest regret or mistake. If I were to completely rebuild this from scratch, I would have never included this, okay? This was obviously, so there's the battery for it there. This was obviously meant to be like a 12-volt soft wash system, which is a good idea, and they are useful. But where I live and the kind of work that I do, and just sort of the way I do things, this has turned out to really not be that useful. I very, very, very rarely use this. This 12-volt pump I've had for well over a year, and it's not even close to being worn out. So those of you that use 12-volt pumps, that should tell you something, because if you're using these on a regular basis, they only last a couple months. And this one has lasted well over a year. So that's how often I use it. I very rarely need concentrations of any kind of chemical higher than I can get out of my downstream injector. And since the downstream injector is just such a more efficient way of applying chemical, if there's any way I can get away with using that, I do, as opposed to this soft wash system, which I have to run a whole separate hose for, and it's a whole other ball of wax. So I've just found that I don't really use that. What I'll sometimes end up using this for is just a makeshift chemical container. So if I have a day where, you know, I've got 4 or 5 jobs lined up, and I'm estimating I'm going to need 20 gallons of bleach, sometimes I'll just fill that up with my chemical, drop my chemical injector dipstick in there, and use that as a larger chemical reservoir as opposed to these 5-gallon buckets. But other than that, it very rarely gets used. You know, the other thing is too, if I find that I do need a chemical solution stronger than what I can get out of a downstream injector, then my next go-to will be to use an X-Jet, which I always keep on my truck. There we go. So I keep on my truck a dedicated X-Jet gun and wand, just in case I do need to apply some chemical at a stronger concentration than my downstream injector. So it's got its own M5 twist on it. I have hard plumbed the X-Jet chemical injector behind the wand, as opposed to how it would normally come. It would normally come with quick connects, and you would attach it at the end of the wand before the nozzle. I've actually found it works better, and I just like it better behind the actual lance itself. And so I've just hard plumbed that in there, and it never leaves. And this gun is just my dedicated X-Jet gun. I found I can get about 3 to 4 times the concentration of chemical that I can from a downstream injector. On the extremely rare occasion where I need to apply chemical even stronger than what I can apply with this, then I'll go to the 12-volt system. But like I said, that almost never happens. I guess it's one of those things, when I do need it, I'm glad I have it, but it takes up so much valuable real estate on my rig, and it's used so infrequently that I'm thinking about completely getting rid of this and maybe putting a second pressure washer here, maybe having an 8-gallon per minute pump here, and then a 5.5 gallon per minute pump here. So this second pressure washer would run things like a surface cleaner, or things where I need a little bit more PSI, because a 5.5 gallon per minute pump will give me a little bit higher PSI than my 8 gallon per minute pump will. And then that way, if I ever, if like next year I hire help, I hire a helper or something, we could be running 2 machines off of 1 trailer. This would be like a downstream machine, and then somebody could be, well, actually it would be opposite. So like the 5.5 gallon machine could be downstreaming chemical, and then somebody running this 8 gallon per minute machine could be right behind them rinsing, something like that. I don't know, that's what I'm toying with, but I think I might be getting rid of that soft wash system, because like I said, between the chemical injector and the XJet, I really get as strong a chemical solution as I ever need. I think a lot of us, myself included, but a lot of us overestimate how strong of chemicals that we actually need to use, especially bleach. I think a lot of us think we need to use way, way more bleach than we actually need to use. This is something I've talked about on my channel before, and I've probably beaten it to death, but I run a 2.3 in orifice on this just regular run-of-the-mill general pump chemical injector. With this 8 gallon per minute pump, I'm maybe getting 0.5%, maybe 0.35% solution coming out the end of my gun, and it's plenty. I never have a problem getting anything clean with that, especially during the summer. During the colder times of year, you might need to bump that up a little bit. I might throw a 2.1 or even a 1.8 orifice in there, but man, during the summer months, I never, ever have a problem removing organic growth using a 2.3 injector. Never. I don't see any reason to regularly use a higher solution than that. Your results might vary. You might live in a climate where, it's warmer and more humid, and you might have more and heavier organic growth. I get that. And then, you might be in a situation where you need to use a heavier concentration on a regular basis. I totally get that. But for me, in a dry, arid mountain climate like I'm at, you're just wasting money, and you're assuming more risk than you have to by using a higher concentration than that, in my opinion. So I think that's it. I think I covered everything. I've just strapped a little ladder onto the tailgate there. Pretty hillbilly rigged, a lot of the stuff, but it's worked for me. It's very simple. It's very basic. But I think from start to finish, I put this rig together for less than $10,000, and that includes the trailer, that includes the pressure washer, that includes literally everything. Starting from nothing, I built this for less than $10,000, and it's returned to me hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, hey guys, Future Patrick here. I'm gonna butt in real quick before I do the outro. I realized that I forgot to really mention any specific brands or model numbers on any of my equipment there. I don't know if anyone's really all that interested in that, but if you are, let me know down in the comments. I'd be happy to give you the exact brand and model of any of that equipment. I still have the receipts for everything. I could even provide you a link of where I purchased it. I purchased pretty much everything on that rig online, and I spent a lot of time, did a lot of research. So I'm pretty confident, at least at the time I bought it, I got the best price available. So, if you want to know what any of that equipment is or where I bought it, please leave a comment. I'd be happy to send you a link and point you in the right direction. All right, back to Patrick from the past. Oh, I'm pretty happy with it. Let me know if you have any questions. If there's anything you notice that you think could be improved, let me know. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a plumber. I'm just a guy that likes to tinker. And this is, like I said, this is just sort of the most recent iteration of this. I would love to hear any suggestions for how to improve this or make it more efficient. So, all right, guys, hopefully this was helpful. Take care. Flex Talks, the podcast, voted the best new podcast of all time. Take that, commie.